Now, whether or not you watched part 1, today's video stands on its own, because even if you saved well for retirement, even if you know how to withdraw from your 401k, that's just the beginning. A lot of us, we're just not confident we know how to actually live off this thing that we've been feeding for years and decades. And honestly, many of us don't even know what we don't know. And I say that because everything that I am covering in this video and the video I did last week were things that I had never even heard of before I turned 50. Terms like liability risk, IRMA surcharges, RMDs, and sequence risk, just to name a few. Now, if you're Gen X, you and I both know that nobody gave us any instructions when we were starting out. And now, there's not a clear roadmap for what happens next. We're the first full 401k generation, and we'll be the ones figuring it out for ourselves and for everyone coming after us. So let's get clear on what's really coming before we retire, not after. And number 1 on the list is, are you emotionally ready to watch your balance decrease? We've spent our entire working lives saving, watching the balance go up most of the time. Pretty soon, we're supposed to reverse all of that and be okay with watching it go down. I don't think there's enough talk out there about how psychologically difficult it's going to be to start spending from your life savings that way. It feels like you're doing something wrong, even though you're doing something right. We've been in accumulation mode for so long that the mental and emotional shift is going to be difficult. And many of us, we're just not ready for that. And number 2 is, how do you keep your 401k or your IRA protected? Unlike pensions, 401ks, they're not protected against life's curveballs, such as long-term care, which Medicare doesn't cover, liability lawsuits, medical emergencies, scams that target older adults especially. Unfortunately, all it takes is one major event, and that could potentially unravel 30 years of saving. This is something our parents didn't have to worry about, but we do. And while we can't protect against every calamity out there, we do need to make sure that we're properly insured and have fail-safes in place to keep our accounts as safe as possible. We have to start looking at ways now to protect ourselves and our future selves. And number 3 is, should you be thinking about required minimum distributions, or RMDs for short? Should you be thinking about that now? You can't leave your money in your 401k forever. Currently the law states at 73, you have to start taking some of that money out, even if you don't need it or want it at the time. And you might think, well, I don't need to worry about that now. I'll worry about that when I turn 73, right? Well, it would be much better if you do start thinking a little bit about it now, because there are things that you can do to cushion those withdrawals. Rather than wait to pay all those taxes on a larger 401k balance in your 70s, you may decide in your 60s you want to start withdrawing some of that sooner. Or you might want to start converting some of that money in your 401k to a Roth IRA and pay the taxes today instead of later. They're just strategies that, whether or not you use them, it's good to think them through for your particular situation. Because if you have a large 401k balance when you enter your 70s, the amount of the RMDs that the IRS requires you to take, it could be very large as well. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say in your early 70s, you still have $1 million left in your 401k. RMDs kick in. IRS requires you the first year to take out around $37,000 at least. And you'll have to pay taxes on that $37,000 all at once. Let's say at 73, you have a balance of $400,000 in your 401k. The RMD in that situation would be around $15,000. And once again, you'd have to pay the taxes on that all at once. And these big RMD withdrawals, they can push your Medicare premiums up. That's when the IRMA surcharges kick in. And RMDs are something that you have to take out every single year, and you can't forget to do it. If you forget or you choose not to do it, the IRS will penalize you 25% on that amount. That is not a mistake you want to make at 75. So much for simple retirement. And number 4 is, what happens if you start losing mental acuity? This one is tough to talk about, but it is real. Managing a $300,000 401k or a $900,000 401k at age 62, that's one thing. But managing it at 75 or 85, that's something else entirely. With a pension, you just wait for that check to show up every month. 401k is not going to be like that at all. As we age, there could be memory issues, less tech familiarity. We have no idea what the technology is going to be, 20 years from now. Changing tax laws that we have to keep up with. What happens when you forget to take those RMDs? We talked a little bit about that in the last point. What happens if you miscalculate your taxes and underpay? What if you don't notice suspicious activity on your accounts or fall for scams? If the system depends on someone staying mentally sharp all throughout their 80s, then that's a complicated system. And number 5, are you prepared to manage your own retirement income? My mom, she's a member of the silent generation. She's in her 80s. Currently, I take care of her finances for her. And they're fairly simple. A few recurring bills, a single bank account, a Social Security check that gets direct deposited every month. But that's not the retirement we're going to be dealing with. Ours is going to require a lot more coordination and a lot more decisions. We'll have everything I just mentioned with my mom, plus 401ks and IRAs, possibly an HSA account, investment allocations to think about. It's like, do I stick with the 70-30 stocks to bond mix, or do I need to change that to 60-40? There are market fluctuations and sequence risk that we have to consider, tax withholding and RMD paperwork. And here's the hard truth. As we age, our brains slow down a little bit. Decisions take longer to process. And here's the truth. Complicated finances, as you age, they tend to be a lot more stressful. Do we simplify long before we get to this age? And how do we do that exactly? Which leads me to number 6, is who do you get to help you with all of this? At some point, you're going to have to make a decision. You're going to manage it all yourself, or are you going to hand it over to a professional, or trust someone in your family to take care of it? And no matter which route you take, the biggest question is, can you trust the person you're handing it over to? Now, if you plan to manage it yourself or within your own household, then now is the time to self-educate on everything it takes to retire with a 401k. How to avoid costly mistakes and what you need to know before you take out those big lump sums, whether it's in your 60s or 70s or beyond. It's time to think about just the time commitment that could be involved with this, because it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. And if you're leaning toward hiring professional help, that's great too. But you'll also have to do your homework with that. I mean, can you tell the difference between a fee-only fiduciary and a commission-based advisor? Do you understand the difference between an investment advisor and someone else selling you annuities? Can you tell who's working in your best interest? Now, I know in my personal situation, my desire is to be able to manage it myself for the rest of my life, or at least as long as possible. But I think realistically, all of us need to think about, at some point, we need to hope we know exactly when it's time to hand it over to someone else. And hopefully there is someone else that is trustworthy we can do that with. Now, we were the first generation to be handed the 401k as our primary retirement plan. We weren't given any instruction back then, and now here we are, the first generation to fully retire dependent on a system that we were never trained to manage. You know, we couldn't see what was coming when we were 18, but we can see it now. And that's why I made these videos, so that we don't enter retirement blindly. You know, the difference between the 80s and today is we have access to information. But the catch is it's still up to us to understand it and to use it. And if you missed part 1, I'll link that right here, because you need to know the right questions to be asking yourself as we enter the final countdown to our retirement. And hey, don't let today's video bring you down in any way. We're Gen X. We figure things out. You know, not just for us, but for everyone coming after us. Have a great week. I'll see you soon. Bye.